Hi everyone, welcome to the Racist War on Everything. We're on episode 206, and on this absolutely sweltering Perth day, you are joined by Fenian and no one else. So, look, Nolsey and Khyber can't make it today. I reached out to some other people. Basically, I can't do this show with another person unless I significantly delay it, so I thought, what the hell, I will do it by myself. So, sorry, but you are stuck with me today. While I'm in a room with no air conditioning. My microphone's got a windsock, so hopefully the fan that I've got blowing on me isn't going to cause too much of a disturbance. So anyway, as I chat to myself like a crazy person, I will get on with today's content. So I thought I would start off with going on about the Israel-Gaza situation that I'm sure we're all watching pretty closely right now. And the latest piece of news in terms of how Australia is wrapped up in this is the decision to stop or to freeze funding to the UNRWA. So that is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian refugees. Now, it wasn't just us. This is a unilateral freezing of funds. We've got the United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, the Netherlands, and Finland have all pulled out. I believe America was the first one to pull the pin here. All right, so what is actually going on with all of this? Why would we freeze aid at a time where you're looking at this tiny strip of land, which, you know, it used to be the second most densely populated in the world. Now, considering they're all crammed into the southern part of Gaza, very safe to say that is by far the most densely populated area in the entire planet. The only other place that could come close would be Hong Kong and maybe Tokyo. So why would we do that? Why would we freeze funds when we're talking about a country with an absolute humanitarian crisis? I believe over 25,000 people killed now, about half of whom are children, the vast majority of whom are civilians as well. So we know that even things like access to clean water is scarce at the moment for the 2 million odd people you've got crammed into the south of Gaza. So we're told that apparently employees of the UNRWA had been involved in Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Okay, well, look, I was watching a bit of Norman Finkelstein yesterday, who, yes, his name definitely does echo, but he's one of the few honest commentators on the Israel and Palestinian conflict. And he said that there's two main things to say about this. The first is that, well, okay, let's assume that what Israel is claiming here is absolutely true, that there's no doubt that Hamas's members were employed through the UNRWA and other groups as well. Let's assume that's all totally true. Well, the way he put it was, all that really tells us is that the people in Hamas have day jobs. That's it. Think about who the biggest employers are in Gaza. Now, I didn't look into this, but I'm pretty sure the UNRWA is the biggest employer in all of Gaza. The reason why is because you're talking about a tiny strip of land where basically nothing can go in and nothing can come out. You know, it's that blockade that has been there since 2006 when they were told to participate in democratic elections. But, you know, unfortunately for the United States and others putting pressure on them to actually have elections, they ended up voting in the wrong party. They voted in Hamas. So since then, you're talking about what David Cameron calls an open-air concentration camp. Okay, that was a Tory Prime Minister of the UK who said that. It is an open-air concentration camp. So they are completely reliant on aid from the United Nations. And obviously, people need to work in those roles. We're talking about people who work in essential services like health. There's also many teachers who are employed through that. So the rest of Gaza's economy is just a wreck. Obviously, right now, it's just even worse because they're just reducing the entire place to rubble. But when you destroy a piece of land like that, a population like that, when you make them that destitute, they're obviously going to be reliant on aid. So they rely on this body called the UNRWA, and they work with it. And that's it. So it is no surprise that you are going to see at least some overlap here when you're talking about what is likely to be the biggest employer in the country. Now, Israel is also making the point that they have previously pointed out that the UNRWA has been doing things like radicalizing children in schools. Well, as I said before, they employ most of the teachers. So what else do you think they're going to be teaching the kids? Okay, you're talking about a population that is just terrorized on a daily basis, is used by as a punching bag by Israel. Not a surprise that the teachers are going to resent that and therefore pass on the lessons accordingly to the children in the classroom. And by the way, don't fucking tell me that Israel wouldn't do that. Don't tell me that there's no elements of indoctrination in Israeli schools. Of course there is. So Israel pointing this out is kind of like saying, oh, now, see, we told you so, that this is going to happen. So you've got to freeze aid to them. And remember, this is not military aid. This is humanitarian aid, which is no doubt going to accelerate the death count and just put an even more crippling amount of pressure on the already extremely strained health system that exists, or what is left of it in Gaza. And, even in the West Bank, they are knocking off people in hospitals now too. Now, the second point that Finkelstein made was that, well, can we have some evidence here? Apparently, the only evidence that Israel has disclosed so far is emails and text messages. That was it. And Israel has done this before, where they have fabricated communications of that kind, and it's just turned out to be a complete hoax. So the way I see this is basically the same as how Finkelstein saw it, which was this is actually just simply a public relations tactic being used by Israel with the added effect of further crippling the population in Gaza. They want to actually destroy the civilian population there. They want to make Gaza an absolute living hell so they can force out as much of the population as they can to live in the West. Okay, that's the ultimate goal. I have no doubt that since October 7, that was their goal. So it makes sense for them to pull something like this. It's a desperate attempt to make them look more moral, because they're trying to say that, the whole population in Gaza is just wrapped up with Hamas somehow, or wrapped up in terrorism, I should say. While at the same time actually crippling aid, which is what they've done. Now, something else I was reading here was that talking about the Australian response here, and you know what, I might just go and F5 Australian Jewish News, which, as I often say, is a source of information or news, if you could call it that I definitely do recommend. So, having a look at this article that I read the other day, as you can imagine, the various Jewish organizations from around Australia have praised this move from the government. And maybe I'll just read out a short little quote here from Alex Rivkin. So he is the co-CEO of the ECAJ, and he has welcomed the decision and also hopes that the suspension of funding is, quote, made permanent in time. Extreme care must be taken to ensure that Australian aid spending never goes to malevolent actors like UNRWA ever again. So there you go. We've mainly been told, that there's a funding freeze rather than just the all-out cutting of aid. But that's not good enough for these groups. Now, maybe the government is simply just selling it as a freeze right now because they don't want to create the impression that they are, leaving the suffering population to die without any form of humanitarian aid. Maybe that's it, but it is absolutely clear that those who have been putting pressure on the Australian government and governments around the world, as I read off all those countries before, these Jewish groups want a permanent freeze, permanent suspension on all of this spending. Now, the Zionist Federation of Australia president Jeremy Liebler, who yes is related to Mark Liebler, said, "We are calling on the Australian government to desist from resuming funding until UNRWA removes all glorification of terrorism from its school textbooks, fires all teachers that have praised terrorism, and commits to a transparent third-party audit of all its finances." Oh my God. A third-party audit of all its finances. Wouldn't Israel absolutely love that? To be going through their books like an accountant. I wonder what they would actually end up with at the end of that. So it's clear what's going on here. Now, at the same time, I will point out that Australia apparently is going slow on the processing of military export requests to Israel. Now, this seems to be an issue that's going on in Australia's bureaucracies, obviously in the defence sector. And this is regarding military goods of the non-weapon variety. So whatever else we can contribute to Israel's army through our defence industry. So we have not apparently supplied weapons to Israel for at least 5 years. So what's actually going on here? Well, a number of applications have been made to the Defense Department from the Israeli government and also other Israeli contractors for a number of different goods. And apparently, ever since those applications were coming in since October 7, none of those applications have been approved. So it looks like they're deliberately stalling here. So I'll just read out, this is a quote. This is someone who spoke to the ABC as an anonymous insider in Australia's defence industry. Said, "There appears to be a deliberate go slow happening on anything to do with Israel while the war in Gaza continues. Nobody in the government wants to be seen to be either approving or rejecting Israeli military sales." So what's going on here? It looks like you've actually got somewhat of an anti-Israel deep state in Australia, or it's just simply, what we've talked on this show a number of times about the Labor government doing this difficult tightrope act where they've got to appease Jewish lobbies and Jewish donors, but at the same time, they've got to appease Muslim and Arab electorates because they basically all vote Labor. In Australia anyway, Muslims, Arabs tend to be very, very supportive of the Labor Party. So, while at the same time, a lot of people say, well, look, it doesn't really matter that countries in the West are becoming browner. You just look at the UK, like with their Pajit prime minister at the moment, they're still as gung-ho with Israel all the time. Okay, sure. But like in Australia, I honestly think it's different. I think because of the high amount of Muslim and Arab populations that we have here, like particularly those clustered in Western Sydney, and considering that they all line up on one side of the political fence, that is, they all vote Labor, pretty much, I think this is a golem that Jews have created. and it explains why Jews turn to forces like neoconservatism. They perhaps realized that going against white Christians so heavily was not such a good idea when they had all of these Muslims who wanted to destroy their state in the Middle East. So, similar kind of thing happening in Australia, where we're seeing this unusual sort of political realignment, where even though, it's a joke to call the Albanese government anti-Israel, of course, but you are at least trying to, we're seeing them try to at least appear like they are more than just sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and that there are aspects of Israel's current military campaign that they are uncomfortable with. And yeah, that's what I think they continue to do. Okay, so we might remember a couple of weeks ago, we did cover what was, or at least what looked like to be, an arson attack in the suburb of Caulfield. So this was a burger joint called Burgatory. It is owned by a man of Palestinian heritage and a man who is actually active in promoting the Palestinian cause. I know he's gone to a number of rallies. I think he's spoken there as well. Being a rich guy, he's probably donated funds to it too, I think. So anyway, this naturally caused a lot of people to say, was this some kind of political act? So, I mean, I guess then you could actually call it an act of terror. And what I found very fishy at the time when it did happen, when police basically knew nothing other than the fact that this fire had occurred at the Burgatory, they quickly put out a statement saying there was no reason to think that it was motivated by race or by politics, which, as I said, very weird, because it's like, hold on, the fire's barely gone out and you're already issuing a statement saying that. So what I think is going on, because there's no doubt that there are racial tensions that have sort of boiled over since October 7, and the so-called successful multiculturalism experiment in Australia was actually shown to be not that successful after all. And no, we don't have magic dirt in Australia that is somehow going to make all of this work. I think that they were just trying to keep a lid on it. They put this out. They put that statement out saying, no, it's not racial, it's not political. I don't think because, they were under pressure from Jewish groups. Not to say they don't influence the police, of course they do. But basically, they've got a tough enough job trying to actually to stop these tensions from boiling over too much. So now Victoria Police have put out a statement saying that they have arrested a 27-year-old man in Carnegie and a 25-year-old man in Dallas earlier in the morning. And they're expected to be charged with arson, or at least they were at the time. I was reading this article. This only came out yesterday. So let's have a look at one of the MP for Caulfield, David Southwick, who I don't believe is Jewish, but remember he has an extremely Jewish electorate. He said, such blatant anti-Semitism is appalling. To anyone that jumped to conclusions, the Jewish community deserves an apology. Okay, now what he's referring to here is that the police didn't just announce the arrest of these two men. They also said, quote, "We know this incident was not a hate crime. It wasn't motivated by prejudice or politics." So this naturally has got the Jewish lobby celebrating. And they're saying, okay, all of you people who said there was a hate crime, you owe us a big apology now. Well, again, considering the fact that police were so quick to jump to this conclusion before they had done any form of investigation whatsoever, again, I have to question this. There's no detail here. They simply just released some details of these men and have said that they know the incident was not a hate crime. They haven't said what it actually is. Now, it could be a range of things. It could be a vendetta against the guy. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if there's really anything much more than that. But surely at a time where you had a lot of protests going on about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and then a guy who was very, very active active for the Palestinian cause, you don't need to have that great pattern recognition to see that there definitely could have been a political or, yes, even racial element involved here. Now, remember, I've got to point out, I still actually get emails from Rebel News. And it's from years back. I haven't cancelled it because sometimes I just like to kind of laugh at some of the stuff they send. But I got one the other day, and I learned that gym that Avi Yemeni used to run went up in flames. Now, they instantly jumped to the conclusion that this was politically motivated. They didn't say racially, to be fair, but politically motivated because, kind of the opposite side now, Avi Yemeni is obviously a very prominent activist for Israel. Well, okay, why is it okay for them to jump to that conclusion? Further, it's actually even more ridiculous for them to jump to that conclusion than it is for the purgatory because, well, Avi Yemeni doesn't own the gym anymore. Okay? Now, sure, it could have been a case of like the arsonist just got it wrong. They thought he still owned it, but he doesn't. So they just kind of got the wrong target. But it's still less likely, isn't it? Again, it could have just been maybe they don't like the new owner. Maybe they got some vendetta against him. But we all know what Rebel News is like. This was a grift as well. And naturally, that email where I read about this, they were asking Rebel News readers to contribute to Avi's security fund. And apparently he needs better and better security all the time because of the rising tensions. Okay, let's talk about Australia Day. While we still can, while we still have it, while we're still allowed, sort of, to celebrate it. Now, while I'm recording this, Tom, Joel, and Blair are talking, I think, pretty much exclusively about this on their stream, so they're obviously better qualified to talk about this than I am. But yeah, there was this apparently neo-Nazis in black clothing with balaclavas were menacing people in the CBD, and apparently the police did a bang-up job at making sure that menacing was kept to an absolute minimum. All right, so look, what happened here is you just had a bunch of guys who were on the train. They were heading off to a location to do an Australia Day march, and I did catch actually some of this of Joel and Blair's stream that they'd been doing with Tom on, and Tom was saying that the goal here was basically to, well, put a real, authentic celebration of Australia Day back on the table because it's something that we really haven't had for so long. Every year, it's just another debate on should we do this or not. Invasion Day rallies are given just as much coverage, if not more coverage, than the actual celebration of Australia Day. And isn't it funny that they're always allowed to do their march? That obviously comes at a cost to the taxpayer. But when it comes to a bunch of guys who just wanted to march, and there would have been not even 100 of them, they're arrested. Now, what crime did they actually commit here? Well, I'm failing to see anything. I remember what Joel was saying was, well, it's not a crime to dress in black. It's not a crime to take the train with your mates to a location. It's not even a crime to cover your face in public. Obviously, we just came out of COVID. We know that. So they were arrested, however, before they got to their destination. I would still argue that most of their objectives for that day were met because, well, one of the things they love to do is, kind of heighten the contradictions and get into the media cycle, and the media certainly gave them that coverage. But they didn't get to do the proper march and get to their location and everything. So they were arrested. But I remember Joel saying that no charges were laid, okay? Because what could they actually get them on? They keep going on. There's commentary now about how lenient, apparently, New South Wales's hate speech laws are. And, people are saying that the laws need to be amended so that guys like this can just be arrested and charged with some ridiculous hate speech violation. Okay, but look, as far as I know, not a single one of these guys has actually been charged, so no law has been broken, as far as I can see. But yeah, we may well get this reaction. We know that the Jewish community anyway is pushing for much stricter hate speech laws. They want it to become under the criminal code in New South Wales. And unfortunately, Chris Minns has been very receptive to that message and has made a number of public comments basically saying, yeah, okay, we're going to review it for now, and then we're going to do what you want. So yeah, I think that will unfortunately be coming further down the track. But you know what? That's all the more reason to go out and do marches like this, because, well, it might not be very long until you can't anymore. I mean, National Socialist symbols, gestures, etc. are already illegal at the Commonwealth level as well as the state level for some states. It's really just a matter of time until they'll say, okay, well, it's illegal to go out and celebrate Australia Day. That's not hyperbole, okay? Because that's actually basically what happened to these men. They weren't allowed to celebrate it in a particular fashion, particular style. All right, so we probably also know it was around, I think it was 81 councils all up who did not do their citizenship ceremony, as is tradition to do it on Australia Day. So there are a number of coalition MPs who are now saying, well, let's go and just strip those councils of that responsibility and we'll just do it ourselves, or, we'll force them to do it. Because, they actually did it before. Scott Morrison, the only good thing he did, quite possibly, was, well, just that. He stripped them of that responsibility and made it compulsory for those citizenship ceremonies to be held on January 26th. Now, they supposedly got a hard-right conservative as their leader right now. Come on, Peter. Surely you can actually go with that momentum and the enormous momentum that we have since the no vote came through. And I would also just point out that it's only about 18% of the country, at least according to a poll done by the IPA, Institute for Public Affairs, that want to have the date either scrapped or moved. So, yeah, it's like you only need the political will. Like, you've got the numbers, you've got the support, you've got the momentum, you've got the energy of the public behind you. But do you actually have the will? And for God's sake, you'd think Peter Dutton would, considering Scott Morrison actually did this. A guy who is not part of the so-called hard right of the Liberal Party actually did that. So, I got to say, what's keeping you, Peter? Okay, time for the reformed Stage 3 tax cuts. Most people would probably be getting something out of this come the new financial year. So, as you can imagine, Labor's really been doing a public relations campaign on this. Albo was at the National Press Club, where he claimed that all 13.6 million taxpayers, not just some, will benefit. Everyone who works and pays taxes will benefit. Okay, if you're earning over 200 grand, though, I don't think you do. I'm pretty sure they stay up there, taxed at 45%. Anyway, I think this is purely anecdotal, but I think these are actually going to be popular. Now, the Murdoch press has been relentless in attacking Labor over this, over, what they call a backflip or a broken promise or anything like that. Now, look, people expect their politicians to lie. All right, that's quite a cynical thing to say, but I think it's true. Politicians, much like lawyers, are distrusted generally by the public. And when we do see them back away from a public position and do something else, well, usually it's not that much of a surprise. Perhaps we should be more outraged than what we usually are, but that is what it is. So in this case, I think it all just matters in terms of what do people get out of it. It's not so much that they broke a promise. And I guess, if you really want to look at this at a technical level, okay, yes, it's a broken promise, at least of sorts, because they're going ahead with stage 3 tax cuts, but they said they were going to do them in their entire form as legislated by Scott Morrison, and they're not doing that anymore. But will people care? It all depends on whether or not the cost of living burden is relieved. So just looking at some of this analysis. Now, here's the flip side. I just mentioned the Murdoch press, how they're very unhappy about this. I've seen, rhetoric like this is old-fashioned labor class warfare, like politics of envy, that kind of stuff. Well, you've got the flip side. Remember, these laws have not passed yet. They still got to go through the Senate, meaning you've got to get the support of the Greens and possibly the crossbench. So the Greens are saying the exact opposite here. They're saying, no, actually, if you look at this, if you look at the lowest 40% of income earners, they received just 9% of the overall benefits from the tax cuts. So, by the way, this was actually not their figures. This was analysis from the Independent Parliamentary Budget Office. But, the Greens naturally seized upon that. So, yeah, worth pointing out that there are definitely two sides to this debate. You've got the right saying it's class warfare, and then you've got the left saying, well, actually, these reforms to the stage 3 cuts don't go far enough. And so, considering that negotiations with the Greens are pending, could we see further reforms to this? I wouldn't rule it out. If they were willing to reform it in the first place, I'd say they're definitely willing to compromise to be able to get it through. So we've got other forecasts here. So this was, the Treasury anyway said that these new cuts would lift government revenue by $1.3 billion in the financial year of 24 to 25. Other economists have cast doubt upon this. They've actually got a doubt that it would raise any money whatsoever, considering, these are cuts overall. It all depends on consumer spending, etc., as to whether or not this would result in revenue being increased. But yeah, it just remains to be seen as to what exactly will pan out here. We remember the mining tax, good old Swanee's mineral resources rent tax that came in at 30%. That was just, I remember they had these really high predictions, like, billions and billions of dollars. And it came in at just an absolute fraction of what they wanted to raise. So, yeah. Definitely, you should always be skeptical of what Treasury's forecasts are. Now, talking about the coalition's response to this, of course, like I said, they're out there saying, this is nothing more than a broken promise. And then their supporters in the media are the ones going on about class warfare. Peter Dutton won't quite go there. He won't talk about that. But there are MPs, and these were anonymous sources talking to the Australian. Backbenchers in the Liberal Party often do this, actually, often leak stuff to the Australian. Are saying that there's actually a lot of coalition members who think this could be politically costly to the coalition. standing in the way. Some of them have actually just outright endorsed voting with the government in the House of Reps and the Senate. So this, I think, is a clear indication that these cuts may well be popular. As I said before, it doesn't really matter so much if a government breaks the promise. It's what is the effect of that broken promise. And if it is largely perceived to be taking at least some of the strain away from costing of living pressures that pretty much everyone is facing, unless you're a rich boomer with 3 properties where you can increase inflation rate and rent and everything actually just means more money in your pocket. If you're not in that category, you would probably be benefiting from these reforms and have a little bit more money in your pocket. And you know what? A lot of those people would be in Liberal Party and National Party electorates. So they actually may not like the party that they voted for voting against what they see to be economic benefit. All right, so on to some other issues concerning the economy and cost of living. Just a quick story here. Low-income earners might get an additional tax relief of up to $172. This is due to changes in the Medicare levy. So, as it stands, the government is proposing to change the thresholds above which taxpayers are required to pay the 2% levy. The threshold will increase by 7.1%. That is in line with inflation, not the current rate of inflation, which I believe is actually only around 4% right now. But anyway, that's the way that's moving, and yeah, might be just a little bit of money back into the pockets of low-income earners. Now, the Labor government has also announced that the ACCC is going to conduct a 12-month inquiry into the supermarket industry. And this is basically to do with anti-competitive practices such as price gouging. So I mentioned that the inflation rate has come down. The kind of have we gotten the effects of that yet? Are we feeling it? Well, not at the supermarket, because despite the fact that inflation has had this, kind of slow, steady downward pace, supermarket prices continue to be right up there. And they're outpacing wholesale costs, which kind of makes you think, okay, why is it that they're bumping up retail prices so much if wholesale costs are actually, not going down, but their rate of inflation is going down? So it is suspect. So, yeah, we've got more than just Craig Emerson looking into this now. We've actually got a 12-month inquiry. And I expect it to probably make some damning findings against Coles and Woolworths. But hey, what are you going to do? We've basically got a duopoly when it comes to grocery products in Australia. And these inquiries, even when they're royal commissions, and this is not a royal commission, meaning it doesn't have the same teeth, but even royal commissions usually don't end up doing anything. They give a list of recommendations, and then no one ever implements them. So, is it the old libertarian in me who says that these things are just a waste of money? Well, I'd be fine with these inquiries if they actually led somewhere, but they never do. They just draw up a list of what could be done, and then no one does anything. Okay, now to the Future Fund. So the chair of the Future Fund is stepping down, and that is Peter Costello. And guess who he's being replaced with? He's being replaced with Greg Combet, who is a former Labor minister and noted Julia Gillard backer, and also the head of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, basically the big union boss in the country. Now, reading this article from The Australian, they've got some quotes here from a guy called David Murray, the former Commonwealth Bank chief executive, who he chaired the Future Fund from 2006 to 2012. And he said that Mr. Combe could be a threat to undermine the fund's historically strong investment performance and encouraging it to put its money into so-called nation-building stuff. Ever since I did the financial system inquiry, Greg Combe has been a cheerleader for this so-called nation-building stuff. I think the risks are substantial. He also went on to say that this is like a political appointment because it's like Labor mates rewarding Labor mates. Well, I would just have to say, what about the appointment of Costello then? Kevin Rudd, I believe, appointed Peter Costello, who was obviously a political rival. But that to me actually just says, aren't they just looking for experience in the public sector here? $250,000 a year job as well, I might add. It's about as well as you're going to be paid in the bureaucracies, I think. But, I mean, you want to talk about, like, an ideological threat. Peter Costello not only was a treasurer, longest-serving treasurer for the Liberal Party, he was also a co-founder of the H.R. Nichols Society, which was basically this libertarian think tank. They're still around, actually. They're just not very active right now. And their whole focus is industrial relations. And they basically want something even more extreme than the American model. I was about to say they want the American model, but no, they want something further than that, where effectively the government doesn't intervene whatsoever. You just have contracts made between employer and employee, and then you can fight over it in the courts if there's a dispute. That's basically what they advocate. Well, Peter Costello came from that realm, okay? And he was a treasurer who tried to, certainly had ambitions to be Prime Minister of the country. Surely he would have been an ideological threat as well to the Future Fund. But no, for some reason, all the focus is on Greg Combe. Okay, and on to industrial relations. So the current government has signalled that it is willing to make amendments to the industrial relations bill, of which we've only had certain aspects of passed. This was due to the crossbench in the Senate, basically saying there's stuff here that's too complex for us to give the approval of, so let's delay it a little bit. Now, there was actually, funnily enough, an employer planned protest to be outside of Parliament House. And they've scrapped it. And I just have to wonder, like, how many people were they going to get to go to that protest? Because this was organized by builders. We're talking about like millionaires, even billionaires here. They're not going to turn up themselves. So when it comes to the normie right doing protests, they're very often absolute blunders, or they just never ever get the numbers. I remember when the Gallup government here in WA, Labor government, was set to decriminalise possession of marijuana. There was a protest there organised by Colin Barnett, and I remember, honestly, it was like 5 people, like 5 old people with a couple of placards turned up outside WA Parliament, and it was just an absolute fizzer. So I suspect they scrapped this, not because of Labor's sudden willingness to make amendments, but simply because, well, they were going to put on a fizzer themselves. And look, the government is always, certainly on IR, which is, I guess, one of the more contentious areas of policy, they always are willing to make compromises. So one of them that has been floated is that the 1st of July, that is the new financial year, would not be the operational date for certain changes. And those changes are regarding casual employment and the gig economy. So the basics of it is that Labor wants to make more casual workers and more people who work in the gig economy fall under, what is close to a definition of employee. a full-time employee. And that way you do get statutory rights, like holiday pay, sick pay, all that kind of stuff, which for the most part these people just get none of. You want to have a day off, you get nothing. So I think these changes are important. So I'm not the old libertarian I used to be. The gig economy has grown enormously in the past few years. It kind of started with Uber, and now it's branched out into all sorts of different areas. And I don't buy for a second that this is people taking their destiny in their own hands and being rugged individuals and independent entrepreneurs. No, you're still an employee, but this time you've just been put on a slave contract. That's all. There's nothing in it that does wonders for your independence. So it looks like they might push this back, though, these specific changes to do with casual employment in the gig economy. They might push that back a few months so that the existing stakeholders have time to adjust. So that is welcome news from places like the Chamber of Commerce. But also, it looks like David Pocock, who was one of the crossbenchers they got to work with here, he's saying that he basically needs more time. And, they actually say this in part because they don't have enough staffers. They actually say that they're understaffed, that they're not given enough electoral funding to get the kind of research and everything that they need. So I'm still kind of skeptical on that, but nonetheless, so we're probably just going to continue to see the current plan of reform for industrial relations just sort of given to us in dribs and drabs. It'll be very kind of gradual over the next year, possibly 2 years. All right, climate and energy. Just 2 stories, actually, on this week. We usually have a lot more. But so first of all, we have changes that it looks like our Labor government here in WA is going to be making to the amount of money miners have to pay to extract metals. So, as we know, it is quite an elaborate tax farm, the whole resources industry. We really do make sure we get all sorts of funding in the form of taxes, royalties, fees, leases, etc. that come up, and holy shit, do we get a lot of revenue from it. But anyway, this is specifically concerning nickel prices. Now, there is a glut in the international market. This is how the ABC puts it. They say, in part, that is due to an increase of supply from Indonesia, the Philippines, and China. And that has seen the price of nickel fall by over 43% in the past year. So that is off the cliff. That's enormous. So we saw Andrew Forrest's Wailu Metals reveal it would. They're looking to scrap their plan for nickel mines in the goldfields, and there's other rumblings going on that there are just going to be more job losses and closure of mines in other sectors of this industry. Lithium prices have also plunged, so that is by 80% in the past year. So that is really sparking some concerns here, particularly here in WA, considering our whole bloody economy is about commodities, digging stuff up from the ground here. And, again, like signs of a recession that is coming up. We often say that the construction industry is the ultimate barometer of the economy. That's true, but then I think it's resources. If construction's going bad, if you've got big builders such as ProBuild folding, And then at the same time, you've got this global collapse in the price of resources, and people just aren't buying from Australia anymore. Well, that's bad. That's bad for the state economy. It's bad for the national economy. And I'm not optimistic. I think I've said before, I really do think there's a high possibility of a technical recession this year, or at least in financial year of 24 to 25. We are supposedly heading towards only bringing in 250,000 people by the year 2025. So that means that we're going to have a reduction in immigration this year as well. It will not be as big as what the government says, supposedly reducing numbers for about 25%. I don't see how the hell they can do that, especially when on the cards right now they've already got more sweeteners to get people to move to Australia permanently. So I don't know how they can, on the one hand, say, yeah, we're going to cut it by 25% and then invite more people in at the same time. God knows how they're going to do that. But if we do reduce it in any way, well, they're not going to be able to just rely on GDP numbers anymore. We will go into a state of negative growth where we can't build any housing because all the construction companies have gone bust. And we struggle to actually publicly fund our services because our revenue dries up from a lack of commodity sales on the global market. I do think that we're headed towards that. Now, Peter Dutton actually said something the other day that I actually really agreed with. And that was to do with the funding of the Environmental Defenders Office. Now, we've spoken about there are various versions of this, like in state to state. I'm not sure if there's one at the federal level, but definitely at the state level. What this essentially is, it's a government-funded entity that takes certain projects, like projects that want to be developed or a new mine that wants to be opened up, something like that, basically takes them to court and says the environmental risk that this poses is too great for it to go ahead, and therefore we want it. We don't want to approve it, or we want it shut down, whatever it is. And as we know, probably the weapon of choice for environmentalists nowadays is lawfare. Can you actually take them to court, get an injunction taken out on them, and just stop the project that you don't like? And, one former Labor minister, Joel Fitzgibbon, just said, this is crazy. This is the government actually funding a body that actively works to shut down projects that are approved by the government, because that's what's actually happened. You've got a lot of projects that say got the green light from the relevant environmental ministers, the state and federal level. The government approves. The government says, okay, that's fine. This project can go ahead. Yet at the same time, they're funding these EDOs, environmental defenders officers, to fight their own decision in the courts. It's ridiculous. It is like self-sabotage. And, here's actually what Peter Dutton said specifically about the one in WA. He said the EDO was a bunch of radical environmentalists who are not approaching the situation objectively. We're not going to allow activists to hold sway over our industries, our economy, and our elected governments. So this has prompted our Premier here, Roger Cook. He slammed those comments as knee-jerk, and he also guaranteed to continue to fund WA's EDO to the full extent. So, yeah, not that I need another reason to dislike Roger Cook. All right, on to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So, even though we resoundingly voted no, South Australia is still getting their own state-level Indigenous Voice advisory board to their parliament. And got to point out here that South Australia actually really surprised a lot of people. I mean, this surprised me when I read it, that 64% of South Australians voted no. So I believe, I can't remember all the figures off the top of my head, of course, but I believe that that was even higher than WA and Queensland. So yeah, that was very surprising. And perhaps this is just because they don't like what is going on with their voice, even though it's not in power yet. The fact that they delayed it certainly at least gave the impression that there were things wrong with it, that they hadn't been organising it as well as what they should have, or maybe they got a taste of what some of the candidates can be like. Who knows? But anyway, they've got until February the 12th, that is, Indigenous South Australians have until February the 12th to fill 46 seats on the local voices. On 6 local voices across the state. So that's how it works. They've got 6 voices across the state, all of which then give representations or advice, if you want to call it that, to the South Australian Parliament. So 2 elected representatives from each regional body will then be appointed to the state voice, which will be tasked with providing direct advice to the South Australian government on issues which affect Aboriginal people. So there you go. We're going to get a test run, even though there is not a snowball's chance in hell of another referendum being held on in a federal voice. That won't stop people further down the line either trying to legislate one at the federal level or the state level. Remember, they legislated it for South Australia. So, as I said, at the moment, like, they don't have that momentum because the no vote was so emphatic. But that doesn't mean the Aboriginal industry is just simply going to disappear. They'll always be back. And even if they don't perceive themselves to have that momentum, they try anyway. That's how the left works. I wish on the nationalist right, well, no, I should say we are like that. We just don't have any institutional power. But, even like when you think about conservative forces that maybe could do a little bit of what we want them to do, they're never, ever actually willing to go and take a principled position and perhaps go against public opinion, or at least what is not even sometimes a majority public opinion. It's just that it's a loud minority, and they listen too carefully to that loud minority. Okay, so I'm going to say this was somewhat of an amusing story. So this is about 2 Aboriginal children aged 14 and 15 who are currently stuck in the UK without visas or passports, and they're actually trapped within the UK's child protection system. So it has been referred to as an unusual case. There have been a lot of delays going on. The 2 children are now classed as aliens and without legal status in the United Kingdom. But because of the fact they don't have visas or passports, they can't seem to get them back into the country, into Australia. So just reading from the Australian here, it says the siblings were taken to the UK by their foster parents, of course, because these kids grew up in an abusive Aboriginal house. So they were taken to the UK by their foster parents, who are both British citizens. There you go. There's that misplaced white altruism. In July 2020, with the consent of the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice, on the basis that they would return by that October, giving the carers time to renew their expired Australian visas. So there you go. That's why they were left with no visas, because their parents or their foster parents, their visas had expired. So apparently the COVID travel restrictions, played a big role in this. And now we've got this very unusual situation where they're just left languishing in the UK. Now, at the same time, the children's mother, so she is a person of Wiradjuri descent, she says. At the same time, she is fighting in the court to get these children back off those UK foster parents. So I guess we'll just wait and see as to how all of that pans out. Aged care. So it looks like the Albanese government may be caught out on a second major election promise being broken. And that is they had a commitment to having a new Aged Care Act up and running by July 1st, the new financial year. So, as we know, aged care was definitely an issue in the last election. COVID obviously made that a particularly dangerous and stressful industry to be working in. And we actually ended up seeing a 15% pay rise given to aged care workers. But dare I say they bloody deserve that. Maybe they deserved even more. But just the scale of that increase, I think, really shows you how much pressure they were under, because you had all of these people leaving. And of course, now what are we doing? We're bloody importing a whole bunch of Filipinos and Africans. The Filipinos will probably be better than the Africans, but, there's been leaked footage from these places where they've had Filipino age workers, like, abusing clients, abusing old people who are in their care, and actually just laughing about it sometimes. And now that we're starting to get Africans in to do that as well, that problem's just going to get even worse. So anyway, there's a draft bill that's currently out for comment, and it doesn't have anything in there. It falls short on a range of different matters, such as ensuring nursing home residents have an absolute right to visitors at all times. So basically, a lot of the matters that the government was being lobbied on are simply not there in the draft legislation. Now these various aged care lobby groups are saying, well, you actually need to go back to the drawing board and introduce a new draft bill before the end of March. Because if you don't do it before then, well, we're not going to meet the July 1st deadline. So, yeah, it's hard to say whether or not the government is actually taking this seriously. Maybe they thought simply aged care workers getting that 15% pay rise was good enough. It's just that old-fashioned Labour policy of tax and spend. You just throw money and hope the problem goes away. I would not be surprised in the least if that's what they were doing here. All right, and on childcare, we just had a review done by the ACCC, the Competition and Consumer Commission, into daycare, and it found that you have a number of childcare centres paying their workers more than 20% of the award wage. So, they basically all would just be paying the award wage if they could. If they had ample supply of workers, they do not. So in an effort to actually attract them or to keep them in the job, they're paying more than 20% of what they would like to be. So there is also still, even with that, there's still a shortage. So according to the ACCC, there are 125,000 kids who are on waiting lists for daycare. They just actually can't get them in. So the ACCC found that daycare fees have risen faster than inflation and wages since subsidies to families increased in 2018. The libertarians are going to say, of course, when you subsidize something, you get more of it. Well, the subsidies in the end don't really matter because the daycare centers simply increase their prices accordingly to make more of a profit. And then you end up like a dog chasing its tail, where you have to just keep increasing the subsidies that in turn increase the price of daycare, and then you just keep going. So it's not exactly the best way of tackling the problem. So, as it stands at the moment, you've got parents spending as much as $23,000 a year in out-of-pocket childcare costs, which, if you want a comparison here, is actually on par with how much you pay for one student going through a private school. So a year's worth of private tuition fees. That's a lot, to say the least. Now, in one respect, I think this is good because I don't like the idea of daycare, or at least not round-the-clock daycare. I hate the idea of drop the kids off at 8 in the morning and then come back at 6 in the evening when both mum and dad finish and they've just been, looked after by strangers all day. I don't think that is a particularly good way to go for the raising of our children. It's not an adequate environment. So, there's a part of me that says, all right, rising costs, that's a good thing. Kids on waiting lists, that's a good thing. But we're not actually doing anything to reduce the demand, I wanted to just come to a point where, well, what I would favor is that we just end the subsidies altogether, okay? We should not be encouraging parents to put their children into daycare, but it is a bipartisan policy, unfortunately. Both sides of politics just want to be able to do that to make it more affordable so that they can free up more time for mum and dad to go out and work. And as we know, they're still continuing to push women back into the workforce because there was a lull in their numbers during COVID. One of the silver linings of COVID, I think, was that a lot of mums actually went back to just looking after their kids instead of working. And then when the restrictions started to ease, some of them were actually reluctant to get back into work because they're like, well, you know what? I actually like this arrangement better. Okay, fine. There isn't quite as much money coming into our household ever since I gave up my job. But you know what? We can manage it. And I think I'm actually raising my children in a more ideal environment now. So, yeah, that was a good thing. But, just like with immigration levels, the government and the private sector have been working very, very hard to make up for lost time and just accelerate the process of immigration and women in the workforce. And, the more women you get in the workforce, the more you dilute wages. Okay. So on to education. So state governments and the unions are putting pressure on the federal government to double its planned $3 billion in bonus funding to public schools. So this was announced recently. It's not just state governments, the Catholic schools, the independent schools, you remember, are still partly funded by the government. They're putting their hand out for some extra money as well here. And he said, Jason Clare, that is, a very slick education minister, he vowed to make the extra money glow in the dark to ensure that state government spent it on reforms and to train and retain teachers. What he means there is they'd have to justify and show where the money is going. How is it being spent? And absolutely, training and retaining teachers would be the main thing. I would say you need to also have an emphasis on training and retaining male teachers, considering there's barely any of them left. One of the ways that you do that is actually think about getting rid of all of this woke curricula that they're forced to teach, and a lot of them don't agree with. Unfortunately, women are much more likely to agree with that kind of crap and not have a problem teaching it. And, just because they're more agreeable creatures, they'll just go with whatever the program of the day is. So I want to see more men become teachers. I mean, there was a point in time where teaching was a male-dominated profession, just like psychology used to be a male-dominated profession. It's now just been completely and utterly feminized, and I think for the worse. So talking about international students, and this was, I mentioned sort of mentioned this before when I was saying, for 2024, the government actually has a goal to reduce net migration. Okay, so not just permanent residency, but net migration by approximately 25%. Okay, well, how does this policy stack up then? So, international students who come to Australia will have an easier road to settle permanently under rule changes to education visas, to student visas. Now, the way it stands at the moment, it's the 500 visa, student visa, where you've got to show that you are what's called a genuine temporary entrant. Now, that simply means that you simply have a desire to come to Australia and learn, go to whatever educational institution you're enrolled at, and then leave. That's what you're supposed to do. Very few of these students actually want to do that, but there's nothing stopping them from lying on the application form, of course. But nonetheless, it had somewhat of an effect of at least slowing the tide of international students who end up just living here forever, or, in some cases actually just get a student visa where they're enrolled at some dodgy institution that doesn't even really exist sometimes. That's not an exaggeration. And then they just work. They do cash in hand work, or they do some form of work where it's not recorded, and they're essentially just part of the I guess you could say the black economy in Australia. They're undocumented workers. In other words, they should be kicked the fuck out. Most of them shouldn't be here in the first place, but yeah, that's the way it is. So look, yeah, they're winding this back. The genuine, it's called the genuine student test, implying there, you genuinely simply want to study. You don't want to work, and you also only want to be in Australia for the course of your education, and that's it. And then you want to leave and go back to your own country. Well, that's it. They're loosening those restrictions and essentially just getting rid of that test now. So look out for more international students, while at the same time, we're meant to be cutting our immigration rates by 25%. Okay, so just quickly, WA has reached an agreement with the federal government where, believe it or not, WA schools will be fully funded. So what I mean by that is the exact levels recommended under the Gonski review, if we remember that. It's been very hard for state and federal governments to actually make those numbers and to fully fund each state and territory's public schools to the amount recommended. Well, apparently, for the first time, we are reaching Gonski levels here. So this was just signed with the WA government and the Federal Education Minister, Jason Clare. And this means that the Commonwealth would give WA an extra $777.4 million over 5 years, which is boosting its share of public school funding from 20% to 22.5%. And that agreement also requires WA to lift its own spending on public schools by at least an equivalent amount. So they have to match the spending increases. So on that, what do I say? I don't think it's going to make a difference. All of this, like the Gonski review, basically operates under the assumption that if you do two things, one is fund it properly, and the second is alter the curricula accordingly. As I said before, yeah, I'd like to see the curricula altered. Probably not the way Jason Clare and the WA government would like to alter it. I would like to see politics basically taken out of it. I want to see the feminization of education reduced. You're not going to get any of that. So if, it's simply just a matter of, what do you teach? Maybe the Gonski review says we need to get back to the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, all that kind of stuff. They're ignoring other factors, okay? And yes, I am talking about race here. You're increasingly finding that students are failing, or overall education standards are falling because, well, the complexion of the classroom is growing ever darker. And, it's not just education levels we're talking about here. We're talking about things like anti-white bullying as well, which, yes, are becoming absolutely rampant in public schools. And, if you actually want to stand up for yourself, you're going to be seen as a racist. Very ironic, considering these students are targeted precisely for the reason that they are white. But it is what is happening. And it is disgusting. And it's not much triggers me more than that to see white children verbally and physically abused by invaders who have no right to be here and should not be here. So it doesn't really matter how much extra millions of dollars you put into all of this. Our education system is failing mainly for the reason that we keep enrolling invaders into the classroom. Okay, now going to state politics. So Basil Zempilas has now officially announced that he is seeking pre-selection for the seat of Churchlands in WA, which is a blue ribbon seat, meaning safe Liberal seat, despite the fact it's actually held by Labor right now. It's still considered blue ribbon because, the last election was considered an anomaly. It was just such a thumping victory for Labor that they managed to snatch what were even coalition-safe seats. So Zempilas, I guess, is confident enough that, that election being an anomaly was simply just that, and that it won't repeat itself in the next election. I don't think there'll be any doubt that Basil Zempilas will win this. He'll get pre-selection, and then he'll be able to run in the seat of Churchlands. And yeah, he'll probably end up as a member of Parliament, because I think I agree. I don't see Labor replicating such a profound victory again in the next term. So they're likely to win that seat back. And Roger Cook is saying that he is not spooked at all, not nervous about that prospect. What I'd like to see is, would they actually run him as a leader outside the House? I'd say probably not. I've given the example of Campbell Newman, who ran outside the Queensland Parliament a number of times. I don't think they would do it here, because I still don't think the Liberals are going to win the next election, or the coalition, if they have one. The fragile on and off again alliance that they have with the National Party here in WA. I just don't see them being able to recover to that extent, considering just how hard they were walloped last time. So I suspect that if they do want to eventually run Zempilas as a leader, they're going to have to wait until not the coming election, but the one after. And, look, they've already piled on Zempilas because apparently he made some comments where he maybe didn't think the mic was on yet about the women's tennis being the reserve game. Oh, wow. So in other words, he was saying, this is like the runner-up. All we care about is men's tennis. And this has been construed to be frightfully sexist of him. He reckons, though, that it was just taken out of context. I don't know. Go watch the original footage. You can make your own mind up about that. Okay, so moving on to the Victorian Labor Party. So the Victorian ALP has launched an investigation into complaints from party officials about suspected ethnic branch stacking. As we know, the Victorian branch of the ALP, almost said ABC there, of the ALP is certainly the most notorious for ethnic branch stacking, and no one did it better than Adam Somyurek. So, who was not just stacking it for his own ethnic group, which was Turks, but for many others, Indians, Asians, Vietnamese, etc. So, the complaint. So here's what it's called: Berwick Branch Non-Genuine Member Report. So, basically it becomes branch stacking when you have people signing up for a party for reasons other than simply just wanting to be a member of the party. You're a supporter of the ALP, therefore you want to sign up as a member to support them. What if you're getting your ticket paid for and you're just going on the books there to support a particular candidate, and you're effectively being bribed in order to do it, and you don't give a shit about the party in the first place? Well, that's when you get into the area of branch stacking. What really pisses me off, though, is when people call it branch stacking and it's not. For example, I know I mention this all the time, but in the South Australian Liberal Party, there was an attempt to sort of get back to a more sort of religious conservative leaning for the South Australian Liberals. So an effort was made to sign up a bunch of religiously active Christians in the Liberal Party. And then they said, nah, that's branch stacking. We're going to throw it all out. No, that wasn't branch stacking at all. Those were people who genuinely wanted to join. And yes, they may have had an ideological bent that was at odds with other members or other factional leaders or whatever. But that's still not branch stacking. If they're genuine members, then they're genuine members. Simple as that. And by the way, don't we always recruit people based on ideology? Isn't that the whole idea? A party stands for a particular set of principles and policies and wants to implement them. How else are you supposed to execute that if you don't have the people there who believe in it? That's the whole purpose of it. So I think, referring to practices like that as branch stacking is just ridiculous. But what you've got here is these are mainly links to the Indian and the Sri Lankan community in Melbourne and other parts of Victoria. So that complaint, the non-genuine member report, is raising alarm over an influx of members it alleges are associated with Indian businessman, Abhimanyu Kumar, and Sri Lankan community figure Malik Zavir. And both of those men are former Labor Party candidates. There is basically an enormous amount of suspicion going on that the people they have been signing up are not genuine members and are simply doing it, because they're being paid to and just to get their man pre-selection at the relevant branch. That is branch stacking. That is definitely branch stacking. So usually when they have launched these investigations before, it's turned out to be true. Just look at the fallout from Adam Somyurek. Like, as I said, it wasn't just Turkish branch stacking. It was a lot. There was Lebanese, there was Vietnamese, Indians. The list goes on. So yeah, I think they will actually, when they turn the stones here, they're definitely going to find more examples of that. Okay, and moving to the Victorian Liberals, we had a leading UN official who actually expressed serious concerns about the treatment of Moira Deeming, who, of course, is a former Liberal member of Parliament in Victoria, but she was expelled. John Pesutto had her kicked out of the party. So, this woman, her name is Reem Al-Salem. I assume that's an Arabic name. She wrote a 10-page letter that was published on Wednesday. It was to do with violence against women and girls. And even though, of course, Moira Deeming was not physically assaulted or anything, this did have a focus on her and her, what was bad treatment at the Let Women Speak rally, which, the Australian says in here, was gate crashed by neo-Nazis. And of course, what ended up happening after that was John Pesutto said she was associated with neo-Nazis. And now he's subject to defamation proceedings because Moira Deeming is suing him. And yeah, that'll be interesting. But yeah, just what I found interesting about this was that it actually came from the UN. Usually UN officials and bodies are quick to actually condemn say, protests that are supposedly dedicated to curtailing people's civil rights, in this case, transgender people. So it's good to see that at least there's some common sense coming out of the UN, albeit limited. Okay, and, let's give a territory a shot here. So the Labour Party in the ACT, of course, has been dominated by Labour and the Greens for over 20 years. And it looks like we've got a new party forming there. So this is amazing. The Liberals just can't get traction there. So people are putting their hopes that a newly formed political party, simply at the ACT level, might hold the solution of breaking their grip. So Thomas Emerson, he's an advisor to the ACT Senator David Pocock, has emerged as the first candidate to run for a new party called Independence of Canberra. He says it would provide an option to voters who feel it's time for a change after 2 decades of Labor. Now, Thomas Emerson is actually the son of Labor Minister Craig Emerson, who is, currently doing that inquiry into grocery prices right now. And Craig Emerson was a complete clown. If we remember the Whaler Wipeout song, where he did this really bad parody of horror movies by the Skyhooks. Yeah, he was a clown. Anyway, what can we expect out of this? Well, when you've got a name like that, Independence for Canberra, well, it's a political party. It's a bit silly to call them independents. I know there's other meanings to the word, but considering the fact that this guy comes from Labor stock and he's also an advisor to David Pocock, it seems to me that this is just simply a teal movement. It's, supposedly a centrist movement. It's, the ones who offer environmental policy emissions reductions for people with trust funds. It's just rich people who like looking at climate change as the ultimate existential threat and want to put all of their political capital into that. That seems to be the best thing that they've got going in the ACT at the moment to break Labor's grip on power, which has, been going on for over 20 years now. Okay, and just quick story on the federal ALP. Have you heard of Catherine Murphy? She's actually one of the best-known journalists at Guardian Australia, which of course is a lefty online publication. Well, guess what? She's actually left the Guardian Australia as political editor, and she is now going to be working in the office of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. So that appointment was noted with sarcasm by Peter Dutton, who said she will now be officially running lines for Labor. Well, I guess so. That's kind of the idea. Look, it's completely common for political parties to hire, what are spin doctors, people who know how the media work. Bob Hawke hired Barry Cassidy, for example. Barry Cassidy being the long-running host of Insiders, replaced by David Spears. So, it makes sense. If you're going to go and manage your PR in some way, you need to know how to manage the media, and journalists know how to manage the media. So not a big surprise that that this appointment was made. And also, those who were watching the tennis may have been amused by the sights of Anthony Albanese being booed. So when they called out his name, there were definitely audible boos to be heard, and he was actually just brushed it off. In fact, he referred to it as a national tradition that is booing a sitting prime minister. So that was amusing, but not much more. Okay, so on defence, Stephen Miles, who is the new Queensland Premier, he's urged the federal government to keep deploying troops to deal with the fallout from natural disasters. As we know, there have been more floods in Queensland. Poor Queensland actually goes through a hell of a lot of these disasters. So the reason why he's saying this is because the Defense Department's strategic review has voiced concerns about the Army basically being too involved in natural disasters. In fact, it seems to be the main thing they're involved in. Now, that's for a few reasons. One is we're not officially dedicated to any war effort at the moment, so we don't have that many deployed overseas. But I'd also just say it's a lack of employees. There's just a complete crisis in the workforce. And, actually, that's the next story that I've got here. So there was a survey done of people who work directly for the defence sector in Australia. The survey found that 49% of Australian defence companies found it difficult or extremely difficult to find and hold on to skilled workers, while 33% had little or no confidence their current contracts would continue into 2024. 36% were satisfied with the big contractors' transparency when working with their Australian counterparts, while only 27% believed the foreign primes were prepared to share vital intellectual property. Okay, that was to do with concerns from IT firms. So our defence sector's a mess. In other words, they can't get the staff, and why would they? I mean, what does it mean to be Australian anymore and fight for that meaning of Australia? There's nothing. There's nothing to fight for. So why the hell would you want to join the army? And why would you want to do it just to fight some pointless war that America gets us into for Zog? I hate to say it, but let's actually just continue to use the army primarily as something to deal with natural disasters. And I agree with Stephen Miles. If there's one thing the army can do, and perhaps this would even do something for recruitment numbers, is advertise it by the sake of actually doing something good within this country, not offshore, but actually in Australia and helping people in natural disasters. You might actually get some extra recruitment if you sold it in that way. Okay, so on to national security. That tiny nation of Tuvalu, they've just had a coup happen over there. So remember we recently signed another agreement with them, as we do with all these Pacific Island nations, where it's about reducing Australia's emissions. And we do this because these island nations are the ones most vulnerable to rising sea levels. What this really means is we just give them aid packages, and we give them aid packages so that they reject Chinese aid packages, right? So the Chinese are trying to get more of a stronghold in the Asia-Pacific region, and as we know, they made that security pact with the Solomon Islands, for example, which Australia sort of dropped the ball on. So this was I'm not going to try to pronounce this, but there was a security pact that we signed with Tuvalu, and the man responsible for signing it has lost his seat over the country's general election. So I was only joking when I said a coup. It's still on shaky ground. Now, this pact, it wasn't actually ratified, but one of the aspects of it, I'm not joking, would be to allow Tuvalu's entire population to resettle in Australia if rising seas claim its islands, right? So if they end up in a situation where they would be basically submerged in water, the entire population would be allowed to move to Australia. Now, granted, they only have a population of around 12,000 people, but, that's 12,000 coconuts we definitely don't need. Okay, now, Papua New Guinea, they are saying that they are going to remain in their security partnership with Australia. This is another country where you've got the Chinese making offers to them. For example, they want to train a police force in PNG and help get things back under control. If you weren't aware, there were recent riots in the capital, Port Moresby, recently, and it was basically an excuse for looting. It wasn't so much to do with political discontent. What it was the cops went on strike, and everyone knew that they were going on strike, and they simply took an advantage of the city with no cops on the beat. So if the cops aren't there, well, you can just go and loot and plunder with immunity, pretty much. And holy shit, they just absolutely tore the place up. Now, apparently this was to do with like some kind of an IT glitch. That is the cops going on strike because there was an issue with their pay. Some of them had not been paid, and it was to do apparently with the way money was deposited electronically into their bank account. And so this caused a mass walkout that led to these riots. Now, as it stands right now, PNG has confirmed that there have been overtures from China, that there is an offer there. So, quote, he says, the offer is there and we will assess it. That's the PNG foreign minister. But then went on to say, but we are not going to duplicate at all any arrangements we have with other countries. We stick with our traditional partners. So, in other words, whatever arrangement they've got currently with Australia, they're going to be keeping it. However, they're still open for business when it comes to dealing with China. Okay, just two last stories. So, cabinet papers. We might remember that the set of cabinet records from 2003, that had reached the 20-year mark. And it is under the National Archives Act that cabinet records are to be released after 20 years. But there was one collection of records that were not released, and that was to do with the Iraq War. Now, a lot of people speculated on this. Was this part of a cover-up? Were they trying to maybe hide the fact that there was a lot of Jewish lobbying involved in encouraging the Howard government to join the so-called Coalition of the Willing? Well, you had someone appointed to actually run a short inquiry to see what this was. And who was that? It was former ASIO Director General Dennis Richardson. Now, I'm sorry, but when you get a man like that, former Director General of ASIO, to run that inquiry, I'm going to be very skeptical. But anyway, his findings were that this amounted to nothing more than an administrative oversight and was to do with complications and systemic issues caused by the impact of COVID-19. You can kind of blame anything on COVID, can't you? Even something like this. So look, I don't know. He might be completely right, but I'm always suspicious, and it is suspicious that it was just this one set of cabinet papers that were not handed over to the National Archives on time. All right. Last thing here, I was just going to do, sort of a quick little review of the new mini-series on the ABC called Nemesis. Now, this is about the recent 9 years in power of the coalition government. So, of course, under the prime ministerships of Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, and Scott Morrison. The ABC always does these. I think the first one they did was Labour in Power, which obviously covered the Hawke Keating years. Then you had the Howard years, obviously about the Howard years, and they emphasised how they did not turn into the Costello years at any point. Then you had the Killing season, which was about the Rudd Gillard years, and now you have Nemesis. And now, for the first time ever, you've actually had a former Prime Minister who did not take part in interviews for the series to be made. So if you watch this, I did watch the first episode. Episode 2 will be on next week. yeah, there was a notable absence of Tony Abbott. Um, so the first episode is on Tony Abbott, of course, because he was the one who took them to victory in 2013 when he defeated Kevin Rudd in what was pretty much a landslide victory, actually, which, you have to say after only 2 terms of Labor in government is, pretty decisive. Also, fairly good for a man who a lot of commentators said would never ever govern Australia, who never ever would be considered to be prime ministerial material, yet he was. I'm not singing Abbott's praises here, by the way. I'm simply just saying that he did surprise elements of the media in terms of how effective he could be at an opposition leader and persuading people to vote coalition. So look, it is definitely notable in this that there was a huge focus on Peter Credlin, who of course is a current Sky News contributor, but also was Tony Abbott's chief of staff. She also worked in a staffing role for Malcolm Turnbull, by the way, that very few people want to mention. But, as we've heard, this criticism was all about her having too much access to Tony Abbott, being too influential in the government, and also blocking other influences out. It was often said that to get an appointment, or even just to get the ear of Tony Abbott, you had to go through Peter Credlin first. And this, unfortunately, even Abbott got involved in this, led to accusations of sexism. Abbott famously said, well, maybe people would be a little easier on her if her name was spelled Peter instead of Peta. Very unusual, especially with a man of Abbott's reputation to be saying something like that, saying something so stupid. Nonetheless, it was there, and Peter Credlin actually wrote a fairly lengthy commentary that I read in the Australian today, where she actually leveled the exact same accusation, saying that she felt that this pressure, she only felt it because she was a woman. And then she cited the example of, I actually didn't know about this, but apparently Clive Palmer brought up the issue of her being on IVF. I didn't even know she was on IVF. So, I mean, if he did use it, I don't think it passed through the media very effectively, because I certainly had never heard of it. So what else did it have, though? I'll just go through. The ABC actually have this summary of the different aspects of episode 1. So they said that seeds were planted during the Abbott era for internal dysfunction. I guess the biggest example of that would be simply the fact that Abbott did roll Turnbull for the opposition leadership. And that was actually back when, I mean, what I guess you could say was more honourable about this. Like, it wasn't just simply a knifing out of personal ambition. I'm sure there was an element of that. But Abbott was actually going after Turnbull's leadership on ideological grounds, because remember, Turnbull was all for Labor's environmental policy and emissions reductions policy. He supported an emissions trading scheme and or a carbon tax. Abbott did not. And this actually proved to be such a divisive issue within the party that things got to the point where, yes, there was a leadership spill. I believe Joe Hockey put his name in for a little bit too and realised he wasn't going to get anywhere. So, okay, yep, that seed was planted, I guess. But, it goes further than that. Abbott and Turnbull have actually been rivals like as far back as 1998, when the Republic referendum was gearing up. Abbott, of course, being a constitutional monarchist and Turnbull being a Republican. So I guess, yeah, it went further than that. Topic of same-sex marriage. Yeah, this is one of the points I think I do agree. This was a point that Peter Credlin made in her column today, that they were a bit unfair on Abbott in terms of how this played out. Even though, of course, Abbott was opposed to same-sex marriage, he was not opposed to the idea of a plebiscite. In fact, at that point in time, Malcolm Turnbull was opposed to a plebiscite. He just thought it should go to a party room vote, and then, the pro-same-sex marriage vote would prevail, and then they would just take that to the next election. Well, Abbott was the one who actually said we'd be better off going to the people and having a plebiscite over this. So, make of this what you will, but according to Peter Credlin, that would mean that if Abbott had not lost the prime ministership, he would have actually been the prime minister to have passed same-sex marriage. Well, you know what? I think that could well have happened. Because, even though he was an opponent, he only ever gave that position when he was asked about it. This was definitely not a policy that he talked about very often, or that, he was notorious for. Another issue was abortion. How often did you hear Abbott talk about abortion during his time as Prime Minister? Bugger all. Those kind of, so-called hard right positions that he held as being like a mad monk Catholic or whatever, he didn't really harp on about. Think of his most notable slogans: axe the tax, stop the boats. They were completely unrelated. They talked about Choppergate, so, the downing of Bronwyn Bishop as speaker. She was undoubtedly a very biased speaker. Okay, I will actually agree with the Labor Party here. There's actually footage of Christopher Pyne motioning for Bronwyn Bishop to stand up once when the Labor Party were celebrating some motion that was put forward. And so, she called for quiet at the behest of Christopher Pyne. So she was clearly biased. And then, of course, there were other things like the knighting of Prince Philip. I think that was silly and clownish, but I think too much of a fuss was made about it because that's all it was, silly and clownish. What actual repercussions did it have, let's say, on the economy? None, okay? It was just a silly little, bad optics blunder by Abbott that was actually quite inconsequential. And, yeah, if you ask me, it was a beat-up. They also went through his gaffes. They made the point that Abbott may have lacked charisma. So they had the footage where he winked when a sex worker called up to some talkback radio show that he was on. There was also where some journalist was asking him some hardball questions, and Abbott his response was just to stare at him and nod his head. That was the most cringe one, I thought. I remember actually literally cringing at the time when I saw that. That was pretty bad. But look, okay, fine. Maybe he was a bit stiff, but so was Turnbull. I never, people would always go on about how much more charismatic Turnbull was. I never really saw that. He maybe just looked a little bit better when he smiled, Abbott's not exactly the best looking character, and he had a very weird sort of smile that actually could look like a frown a lot of the time. But I never saw Turnbull as particularly smooth, but according to the ABC, he was much better in that regard, and that was one of the reasons why people didn't see Abbott as leadership material. Of course, one woman in Parliament. So, when he announced his first ministry, Julie Bishop was the only one who was a member of the front bench. And this was apparently to do with Abbott being out of touch, of course, being sexist, and also a lack of consultation with his team and not, taking notice of the people who were saying, hey, we need more women to be in the front bench. One of the issues, though, I'll leave it at this, that I do agree with the ABC's coverage on was the first budget. So the 2014 budget, it was very unpopular. I think what Abbott was trying to do was get the hard stuff out of the way at the beginning. Why did he do that? Because that is the exact same thing that the Howard government did in 96. It's kind of forgotten about now, but John Howard passed what was viewed as a very austere budget in, either 96 or 97. I'm sorry. Howard government was elected in 96, but I can't remember if the first budget was in that year. And those with memories long enough will recall that there were huge protests outside of Parliament House, Canberra Parliament House, where I believe they actually broke into the building. It was ugly. It was really ugly. However, they were able to recover from that, and through budget repair and other kind of general improvements, or what was seen as improvements in the Australian economy, the Libs were able to survive as a result of that, although just barely. It must be pointed out that in the 98 election against Kim Beazley, Labor actually won the popular vote. That's right. So the Libs went in with a very, very reduced majority after the 98 election, and it actually very much solidified the confidence Labor had in Kim Beazley, believe it or not, as a member back then. So I think the fact that Howard was able to survive that and then go on to be the second longest serving Prime Minister in our history, second only to Menzies. Abbott was a backbencher back then, I believe, at that point in time. John Howard, pretty safe to say, would be Tony Abbott's political mentor, and the man I think that Howard always wanted instead of Peter Costello. I think, and this is just based on ideological grounds, Abbott was the more of the traditionalist in the sort of old-fashioned British sense of the word, whereas Costello was a Republican who was actually, Howard might consider it a bit soft on, say, gay issues, issues of like their access to superannuation and the like. Not gay marriage at that point in time. Believe it or not, the entire party and Labor back then was opposed to same-sex marriage. Talk about a tangent. Where am I going with all of this? So the 2014 budget, Abbott made a promise the night before election night that there would be no cuts to health and education, or to the ABC, or to SBS. Now, it's really a matter here of how you define these cuts. I'm sorry to be technical, but again, referring to Peter Credlin's column that I read today, she made the point that what were reported as cuts to the ABC were actually just reductions in the increase in spending that had been allocated by the previous Labor government. So you can interpret that as a cut, or you can interpret that as just getting a little bit less than what would have happened under an alternative government. And then you can say a similar kind of thing when it came to health and education. Well, whatever way you want to spin it, I don't think the public saw it that way. They saw some of the rhetoric that was being used as perhaps a little harsh as well, saying, we're a nation of lifters, not leaners, and we need to recognize that every time there's a hand out, there's a hand in the pocket of another working Australian. Words to that effect that Joe Hockey was using because he was treasurer at the time. And something I don't think they covered, funnily enough, was when Joe Hockey said that poor people don't drive cars. We remember that. So yeah, this was putting all of these signals out there that they were not in touch, that they had passed a budget that was simply too harsh, was too punitive on those people who were struggling, and that yes, that in fact amounted to a broken election promise, a major broken election. Well, a series of promises, because it related to the funding of many, many different areas. So yeah, I think that was also definitely played a role in the downfall of Abbott. That said, I think he probably could have survived. If Turnbull didn't knife him, he probably could have gone into the next election. It is extremely rare. In fact, it's only ever happened once, where you've had a sitting government elected and then thrown out after only one term. That's only happened once in Australian history, and it's never happened to the Liberals. So I think that Abbott probably could have regained momentum. We all know the news polls are biased in Labor's favour. They usually are by about 2% or so. And even though Abbott was losing those news polls, I think he could have turned it around. Okay, I think you've had enough listening to me. I've been here yammering away by myself almost for 2 hours now. So, yeah, guys, remember to check out our stuff at theroaster.biz. And I should be back with Nolsey next week when we start actually doing this as a duo again. So, Thank you for listening, and we will see you then.